Hello and welcome. My name is Matty, and this is another episode of Vocation. Once again, I'm pleased to announce I'm joined by the great Michael Tsarion, and this is a follow-up episode to our previous one regarding who runs the world. There was a lot of new names placed in that last episode and a lot of sort of different historical context for people to go through. So we're doing a bit of a follow-up on that and going into more detail of who the Gaonim are. So just to ask you first off, Michael, who are the Gaonim then originally? What is this main sort of thing that was going on with who runs the world? If you could give us a quick summary.
Sure, I'd be glad to, Matt. It's nice to be with you again. Well, the way I read it is that there were tremendous mercantile and familial interests between the Romans and the Jews. This was a very, very productive time in the first century AD. It was very productive, and it was as productive as the relationship that the Greeks had, in the ages before that. Alexander the Great had made his empire. The Jews were part of it. There was obviously anti-Semitism in both the Greeks and the Romans, but it was minor. It was mostly, it wasn't very virulent. It was there, but it was not virulent. And for the most part, both contingents got on very well. So when you do, as we have done, speak about the Fourth Sect and speak about the Zealots and speak about the Nazarene Church and some of these more fundamentalistic Jews who didn't like the Romans and even that before that the Greeks, yes, that can sometimes shift the focus, and we forget that Judaism in the whole got on very well. And although the history books record the Roman presence as an invasion, as a colonization, on the street level, this is not really how it was. The tensions only happened when these Fourth Sect creatures, all bizarre, we've talked about those, these bizarro guys made insurrection. They would be exactly like our Antifa today or the Black Lives Matter movement, that kind of thing. They were actually socialists. Can you believe that? That's why I make these comparisons, because they were the early anarchists. Right? Two are mentioned in the Gospels sitting with Jesus: Simon Zelotes, that means the zealot, and Judas Iscariot. Iscariot means Sicarai, meaning murderer, assassin. So there's your Gospels even confirming that there was an affiliation between the Nazarene Church, that's Jesus's group, and these extremist groups. So they weren't that different. Jesus had two of them as disciples, and maybe more. You see how it works when you know what you're looking at? But on the whole, the elite within Judaism got on very, very well with the invaders, so to speak, right? And things only went bad. Things were only raised to a fury when these factions, just as you're seeing in the streets today, it's exactly the same. And so the ordinary Jew never forgave these other classes. We'll call them lower class for now. You can split hairs about that because some of them actually turned out to be quite elite, right? But we'll just call them the lower rebel classes. They weren't liked by the whole of Judaism, who thought, you're bringing down the fury of Rome on us. They don't want much from us. And we want to get along and look more at the benefits of what's taking place. And that's the way things were throughout the empire, for the most part. It's only, the whole of our history has changed from the first century onwards, right? Because of the Fourth Sect, these factions that just wouldn't shut up. And I am a person who claims, and you can verify this when you read all the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of these other works, that these were drug-infested creatures as well. I've gone into that in many programs on Enslaved. They were on psychotropics. And this is where their thinking was at. Now, this was all downplayed, and the scholars of the more recent times who exposed it were absolutely professionally assassinated. This was so taboo that the Catholic Church unleashed a campaign of disinformation like you've never seen before. And it's all covered on Enslaved in my programs there. All of this tragedy, right? I'm getting to answer your question in a minute. So what happened was, because of these anarchists who brought down the wrath of Vespasian and then Titus, his son, on Judea, these factions were scattered. But one particular faction, that's the Sadducees, these are very elite, very wealthy, probably the wealthiest within Judaism. And you can look them up. They had special, duties, different from the Pharisees. They didn't get along. I think some of the top brass Pharisees and the top brass Sadducees did get along. But generally speaking, the Pharisees represented the ordinary people in a much more humble and down-to-earth way, whereas the Sadducees would have been like your billionaire class, the oligarchs, and nobody liked them. Now, history books now tell us that after this period that we're talking about, after the smashing of the Temple of Jerusalem and the scattering of Judea, in which over 2 million people were killed, and all the rest of it, Judea was in ruins. And the history books tell us that the Sadducee group, the very elitist, the most elite group, fabulously wealthy, disappeared from the scene forever. We're told this. Now, I have never, since the early 80s, ever accepted that. And I've always, maintained in my own heart that this is lies. And we can argue till the cows come home, whether there's any validity to my ideas on this. But I have always been researching this through, multiple scholars. And my feeling is, to answer your question, is that the Nazarene Church and the St. John the Baptist Church are known by historians to have gone to Haran and to Babylon, and Baghdad area. Other places as well. Emesa, Edessa, like I said, Haran. They're known. This has been documented. So I then said, then why not this group? And in the article we're going to look at a little bit later, Princes of Light, there is a story within Judaism that, although symbolic, and it's a very, very famous Masonic anecdote, right, about a rabbi, Yohanan ben Zakkai, being smuggled out of Jerusalem at the time of this crisis in a coffin. So anytime people have seen a Masonic coffin, and the lid is often just slightly ajar, but you'll see a skull either on the door of the coffin, the lid of the coffin, or somewhere near, right? People must have known this. This octagonal coffin. And you can just see a little mummy inside, wrapped in bandages, or sometimes it's a skeleton. Or, as I say, you get the skull and bones, which is a skeleton, right? Would you not know that story is about the smuggling out of a live rabbi, Yohanan ben Zakkai, out of the streets of Judea while the Romans were, coming in and surrounding the town, ready to destroy the temple. And he gets out because his disciples say that he's died. And it's, the whole ritual, Jews know that the ritual of their burial is very, very, very important, the whole saga. So the Romans said, all right, you can pass, go ahead. They trusted them and they let them out of the city. And the whereabouts, everybody has a different idea of where the rabbi ended up. Some people just say it was in a city like Damascus, a little bit outside, not too far away. But others say, no, he went into Babylon area, and formed some schools there. It's myth. It becomes mythology at that point. Now, I take that, why it's so central to Masonry and Judaism is because this is a clue that the Masons know that they're giving the public in symbolic form. That not just one rabbi got away, but that this is a symbol for the Sadducees themselves getting out. Right? They do. This is how it's done. You see, in their symbolic code, they talk about the fantastical, escape of one high priest, but really it's about something more than that, and it's a clue. You either get it or you don't. So the upshot is that when you go to Babylon and you go up to these areas, you find out something remarkable. And it's not just Mandeans. They were the John the Baptist sect. It's not just the Nazarenes and the Essenes. that you can follow. Remember, Ralph Ellis has followed Didymus Thomas to India, to Malabar. Remember that?
Yeah.
You see that? There's
Yeah.
an Eastern movement, all right. It even got all the way to India. So that we're talking about something that has been historically verified, but not when it comes to the Sadducees. They're just meant to have fallen off the edge of the world, and I just do not accept that. And when you go to Babylon, you find about a group called the Gaonim that just mysteriously appear. A Jewish sect, very, very ensconced in the Muslim world. Fabulously wealthy, extremely powerful, and given all sorts of rights, given all sorts of sovereignty to exist. Do you really need to connect the dots? See, I don't think you do. And their name for themselves, they were called exilarchs, and they called themselves the Princes of Light, which is an Atonist term. And other symbolism shows me that, yes, they're not so much Jews as they are Atonists. They are definitely the Sadducees, and I'm on the trail of them. Now, a couple of other things about their background. The Sadducees themselves, whether they were in Judea or not in Judea, the word comes from sons of Zadok or Zadok, and that itself comes from Melchizedek, a mysterious character that appears in early Jewish history and is a king of Salem that is so Abraham bumps into as he's on his way, from Chaldea into the Holy Land, into Egypt. Right? He's crossing over. This is the father of. Yeah, he's crossing into the Holy Land. He's being guided by God, right? And on the way, he meets. It's very mythical. He meets this strange character called Melchizedek, and from Melchizedek comes a certain priesthood. They're called the Zadokites, and the Sadducees are the Zadokites. But the thing is that there's no mention anywhere in these old chronicles that Melchizedek himself was Jewish. Abraham was Jewish, or would be the founder of the Israelites, but Melchizedek is not. So the Zadokites are not Jews in the fullest, complete sense. And that's not too amazing. It sounds amazing, but it's not, because many other sects had converted to Judaism. In fact, the Samaritans had done that, and even the famous Tetrarchs, the Herods, had done that. None of these were Jews. They were all converted to Judaism. And I believe that the Sadducees in their origin were also that. They were not Jews by birth, and this matters to Jews because that means that you're not from the line of David. Well, we just said they're not from the line of David. They're from the line of this mysterious Melchizedek. And everything would be just left there if that's all, you could grasp. And that's what most history books don't even grasp that. What I've said is already going too far for most scholars. Can you believe it? But let's go even further. There's a monumental step that needs to be made, and I believe is very valid, and you must make it. And that is that this Melchizedek didn't exist. Right? Certainly not in the way that is portrayed, any more than the character Moses existed in the way he was portrayed. Most of that mythology goes back to Sargon and to other previous kings. But back to Melchizedek, I believe that the word Melchizedek, the king of Salem, is really a euphemism for the great pharaoh Akhenaton. And he is incorporated into the story by the mythmongers. Don't worry about the chronology; that won't lead you anywhere. That's completely wrong, because of course we know that physically, these things have to be. The timelines and the king lists are different. But the mythmongers don't care about that. They introduce certain characters to make certain connections that only the initiated can understand. Abraham didn't bump into Akhenaton when he was traveling. What is this? No, it's so much more than that. They're trying to say that Abraham and Sarah were pharaonic. They were all of the Atonist line. This is the way they go about saying it. They are Atonists. That's what the whole point is. So if they were Atonists, then so are the Zadokites. So we're on the trail of the Atonists, remember? Well, now you found them. They're the so-called Jewish sect. If that's all you can see is the word Jewish, Okay. Our conversation is going to be very short because I know where you're heading, right, with the conspiracy theories. But if you understand Atonist, what that is, now we can maybe talk. And that's what we're going. This is why the Sadducees were so despised, and even some of the Pharisees. Remember Jesus? He didn't particularly like a lot of the Pharisees. Remember that? There's this whole thing about them being bad people, and all of that. He complains against some of these elites. Now, as I say, the Pharisees did represent most of the people, but there was still a small elitist group of them that also, was not liked. That's why you get in the gospel so many accusations against them. But the Sadducees were openly hated by everyone. So when you hear that they disappeared off the map, no one in their right mind, especially with some sort of, senses, detective-like senses, is going to believe this. They were just too wealthy. So my thesis then is that many of them went to Italy. They had many contacts with the Romans, real blood brothers here, on a business front and on other fronts, creatively, artistically, whatever, right? Maybe even intermarriage. And there are indications that this was the case. By the way, I even have some on my website that show that the Romans, some of the most Roman patrician families, were converting to Judaism. Did you know that? Yeah. No, very few people do. Yeah, we mentioned a little bit of the collusion earlier on. No, it went even further than what I said. Some of the highest in the land, the Roman families, loved Judaism and were converting to Judaism. There were very deep ties. This has all been airbrushed. It's extraordinary when you find out. So I believe that some of these Sadducees, who we now identify as Atonists, and all this rubbish about Zadok and Zadokites and Melchizedek, is a cover for that. You've got to decode it. These are Atonists within Judaism. They're more Atonist than they are Jew. But afterwards, they go, right, as I say, into all these different lands, into Greece where they had mercantile connections, into Rome, very elite. These are not people of the street. These are oligarchs. But some of them said, hey, our Judea has been crushed. We don't want to be part of that anymore. We never want this to happen to us again. Let's go where we know we can never be under attack again. And in those days, that was the places we're talking about. Babylon. They were rich, they were powerful, and no force was going to, mess with them. Remember, Islam technically accepts Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the founders of even Islam. So they don't mind the Jews. Jews have lived alongside Muslims for over 700 years in perfect peace. Now, that did change, but that's only because left-wing theories entered into Islam, in more recent times, and then conflicts started like you have in the Middle East. But that's not the way it was for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So this Gaonim, then, I believe, can be connected to the Sadducees, and they, the subject of that article, and there are other connections to the Parthians, obviously, and to the Order of Sion, which is female. There's more to it than what I'm saying, but this is just the general outline to answer your question. This Gaonim was originally the Sadducees. They did not fall off the map. They never disappeared. They just transformed themselves. And the key part then is when later, many thousands of years later, when they re-enter the West, they do so, but they change their name. And the name under which they were known when they re-entered the West was the Sons of the Sun, or Freemason. So this is the origin then of Freemasonry.
Yeah, we spoke a lot last time about different power structures in society, including things like secret societies, and we laid the foundations of that previously. Freemasonry was one of the big names that had come up, and a lot of people find it wrapped in this real enigma or real mystery that is hard to penetrate and to understand a lot about Freemasonry. We had mentioned, we'll get into a bit more detail about who this Gaonim are. We'll go through a little presentation that we've prepared, and so I'll really lay this out for people. But can you give us maybe just a quick snippet once more, or synopsis of what these Atonists are? If people, again, this is a new phrase and they haven't followed everything so long. I believe it's the tie back to ancient Egypt. It's the time of Akhenaton. It's about who they worshipped, about their religion a little bit. So who are the Atonists?
Well, that's right. They date from Akhenaton's time.
Mm-hmm.
There are scholars who think it dates a little bit before that with one of his ancestors, but really it comes online to matter more during this period, of the reign of Akhenaton. But it was opposed to the Amonism, right? Amun-Ra, which was the national god of the whole of Egypt. And so what Akhenaton tried to do was try to overthrow Amonism, a completely impossible and ludicrous task. And you don't even know why you have to do it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just solar worship. It's the real monotheism, by the way. But he had this fanatical need to close all the temples of his so-called rivals, None of them could understand what on earth he's doing. It was so radical. It was like a cult leader, like John of God or the Dalai Lama coming along and saying, we're closing all Christian churches, we're closing all synagogues, and we're closing all mosques. And we're going to believe in my balloon animal. All right? That's it. That's exactly what it would have been like. And everybody's going, aye, right. I don't think so. But he did. And what he did was he imported, get this, he imported bodyguards and troops from outside Egypt, from Africa, from Sudan and Nubia. Black policemen, black army troops, mercenaries that came in to be his personal bodyguard to go around and bully people. Does that sound familiar at all, right, with what's happening today? Yeah. So these bullies from the outside were brought in to execute his will. Their bodies have been discovered, Many of them were given tombs. But this Atonism, I've written about that extensively because it really wasn't even sun worship. That was on the surface. Real sun worship is Amonism. So Akhenaton was actually not a real sun worshipper. That was all for the public eye, for the national level. Him and his family privately were what I call Setians. They worshipped the god Set and had done, his lineage, had done, because they're Hyksos. And I track the Hyksos back, outside of Egypt, whatever, in the earlier days, from the West, probably Scythians. And they were the worshippers of the comet god, who was the god of war. And in the Hebrew world, he was known as El Shaddai. I've got all this on my third article, right? Jews and Templars, the untold story. And so Shad becomes Shat, Shet, or Set. See how it works? The Jews just mispronounced it, the Shaddai. And that means mountain. It also means ferocious, thunderer, basically destroyer. So this was their main god of the Hyksos, of the Israelites. Not Yahweh. That's all later on. That is again a surface thing. And also Jehovah's alternative name is Adon, and that is of course Aton as well. So this is another proof that there is so-called Israelites. We just talked about the Melchizedek, we just talked about Zadokites being Atonists. Look, if you really know what you're reading in the Old Testament, the whole of the Israelites are Atonists because their God is called Aton.
The
Don't be
secret name
fooled.
of God, isn't it?
That's it. The secret name of God is Aton, Adonai, Aten, Iten. There's different ways of rendering that name. So at the end of the day, this is why this is so important. It's not just the Sadducees had the Atonist connection. That would be a fascinating thing in history. No. All of the so-called Israelites and Judites have the Atonist connection. All of them. So as we move up to the 1st century, this means that the Galileans, Nazarenes, Essenes, Zadokites, sorry, not the Zadokites, these Sicarii and Zealots also have an Egyptian connection. They all do. Just it's different ranks, it's different branches, it's different. Just like Christianity is broken up into all its different factions, you see? You've got to think of it in exactly the same way. All these denominations, some more powerful, some powerful but less in number. Others are demographically larger. Some are more fanatical. It's just like today, Seventh-day, whatever, Adventists and the Baptists and the Wesleyites and the Methodists and the Catholics and the Protestants. And look how many you've got today. Exactly the same. This was always happening in the ancient world. So that also needs to be entertained. The Israelites and the Atonists are basically the same. But then, of course, we know there was a couple of exiles, right? They had to move out for various reasons. And they did this in 2 waves. 2 great waves of the same people moved out. Then they have to scatter, then they have to go and resettle. It's a big deal. And they have to resettle with, sort of people that they know, but sometimes it's foreign lands and there's a lot of intermarriage. So as you move down through the centuries, there's amazing hybridization. And you can lose the thread of the Atonists. Right? So when you start talking about Parthians and other groups, maybe Persians, you can forget that there's this Atonist thread going on. To find it is very difficult. Ralph Ellis's work helps us. That's why I say it's so important for me, his work, because on the trail of the Atonists, his work is absolutely superlative. It helped me find them when I couldn't find them from any other source. I was checking out the Eastern Illuminati. I was on some of the footprints, but this was the most important connection because he led me right back to them in several contexts. In fact, it turned out that even the Knights Templar and, what we would call the Merovingians, they are the Atonists. And then if you follow Akhenaton to Ireland, you find them there, and all the rest of it. You find them finally as being behind the whole rise of the black nobility, the British nobility, the British royal family, and all the different secret societies that they've, funded and given rise to so that their agenda can be carried out. Yeah, it's an amazing story, an amazing network.
Yeah, and for people looking to know a bit more about that history of the exodus, of these Hyksos being kicked out of ancient Egypt, this is Akhenaton and Nefertiti and their descendants. We've done a few episodes with Ralph already. I think it's just titled The Exodus, so make sure to check those out. But we'll go into a bit more details here now about this origin of Freemasonry and who the Gaonim are. We've made just a small presentation, so we'll go through that just to give us a bit of structure for this too.
Okay.
Yeah, all good. So, this is from your article, Michael, The Princes of Light. This is on the Female Illuminati website. It's article number 8. And so I'll read a little bit off this. People can see the image here of Freemasonry on the right-hand side. Again, George Washington, I believe. You have this famous G, which a lot of people think stands for God, but your claim here is that it's the hidden symbolism is that it's the Gaonim. So I'll start with a little bit about these guys now first. The fascinating story of the super secretive Gaonim, the self-titled Princes of Light, has been told in my books and in articles on this site and on the Irish Origins of Civilization site. This is partly because the Masonic Gaonim have played a sinister role in the history of many lands and nations. This includes the United States of America. When people refer to the bankers, little do they know that they refer to this oddball group whose history goes back before the fall of Judea. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about who the bankers are, because you ask a lot of people, who runs the world? A lot of people say it's the bankers. Well, who were the original bankers? And this is the Knights Templar, as you've mentioned a few times, Michael. And just to give people a little bit more information about the Knights Templar, apologies for the spelling mistake. There we go, back to normal. So, a little bit of information about the Knights Templar. These were one of the richest and most influential organizations in medieval Europe. They answered directly to the Pope, and they were exempt from things like taxes and from secular jurisdiction, which gave them this quasi-sovereign status. And so, whatever the Pope said is what occurred back in those days. If you got excommunicated by the Pope, that was your whole life completely destroyed, and you could be the king or monarch of different countries. If you were excommunicated by the Pope, you were done for. And again, obviously, this is pre-Protestantism, pre-Reformation times. The Knights Templar, they controlled a vast real estate empire worked by serfs across Europe and the Middle East. They also owned a fleet of ships for trade and transport, and at one point held sovereignty over the island of Cyprus. Their financial holdings were staggering, with depositors ranging from common folk to monarchs. Kings like Louis VII of France borrowed heavily from them to fund the Crusades, and even the England's crown jewels were once held as collateral for loans. The order charged fees for services like money transfers and for property management, and they issued loans to nobles and to governments. And this used to skirt around the medieval usury bans, which were forbidden by the church. So obviously, the church comes in, ban usury, ban earning interest. However, here's a pass to the Knights Templar who are working for them. And this brings us on to then the origin of Freemasonry as we go back to the Gaonim again. Here's the symbol of Freemasonry that people are more familiar with. And this is again from your website, Michael. The Gaonim arose in the years following the fall of Judea in AD 70. They were and are descended from super wealthy members of the so-called Sadducee party, which you've been highlighting so far, with maybe a few Nazarenes thrown in. High-level ones, that is. They were on excellent terms with the Roman elite and profited enormously from their occupation of the region. They were allowed to ply their various lucrative trades and enjoyed excellent personal and economic relations with the Roman elite. It was probably members of their coterie who, after the fall of Judea and Second Temple, made new homes in Italy and influenced several Caesars and governors to convert to Judaism. And a little bit about what happened then in AD 70. This is a photo from the Arch of Titus, which you can go and see today in Rome, I believe. Now finally, under Emperors Vespasian and Titus, the Roman army was sent in and Judea was smashed. The Temple of Solomon was ransacked, the Holy of Holies violated, and its sacred objects, including the menorah and Ark of the Covenant, were confiscated and carried off to Rome as booty. History tells us that the culprits were the intolerant Romans, but this is not the case. Their violent and conclusive police action was demanded by the richest inhabitants of the region. There was no other viable solution. The pestilence of the revolutionaries had to be purged once and for all. Now, you were speaking about, Michael, how they got kicked out of the region at the time when they lost this Jewish revolt against the Romans. And you'd mentioned about the importance of this Middle East connection, which will bring us on to Jeffrey Epstein in a little second, which is very apropos to what's going on today. And again, this is just once more from your website. As I explained in previous articles on this and other sites, some of the wealthiest Sadducees made their way to the Middle East, particularly to Baghdad, Pumbedita, and Sura. This may have been because of their lucrative business associations with Muslim merchants. In any case, they were welcomed and left alone to ply their trade. They were permitted to set up shop, own homes, establish temples, secret lodges, and indulge in money lending. They enjoyed centuries of untroubled success and became fabulously wealthy. Before we get on to maybe Jeffrey Epstein for a little moment, a lot of people hear about Jeffrey Epstein and they go, when people walk into sort of the conspiracy field, he's one of the main names that comes up. Just to give people a bit of an overview about him, my understanding was how this group controls the world. We said they were the original bankers, so obviously control a huge amount of the money, and money talks and money is power. But one of the other forms of power that they have is by trying to corrupt people through blackmail. Can you speak a little bit about what the Gaonim, these sort of Freemasonry, these types of secret societies use in order to control people about blackmail and things, or anything that comes to mind there, Michael?
Oh, yeah. Well, I happened to notice when the story broke that his little shrine and temple on the island was almost an exact duplicate of a place that the Gaonim would have used, and was quite popular image. The colors are Jewish, but the design is Muslim. And you find these kinds of places all over, near Edessa and Emesa and Haran. So I'm thinking, well, look at this. The symbolism never lets you down. This man is a cleric. This man is an agent of the Gaonim. Or his ancestry is anyway. There's something being shown to you here. He didn't pick that type of architecture out of the thousands of types of architecture that he could have. Certainly you would never, for the Caribbean or where, this is not normal unless you know what's been going on. But then the criminal aspect of this man is also something that's not unique to him. The Gaonim itself and many of the underground movements that it funded, and these would have been mostly drug-orientated groups, but not exclusively that, right? You have a lot of human trafficking that they've been involved in from way back at this time, and the Templars are all into it as well, and the Templar clerics. But on the Eastern Illuminati side, yeah, this is one of the ways that they made their money. So the old meets the new. There's no doubt in my mind that his connections to Ghislaine Maxwell and his international, see, down through the millennium, you've had these different characters, many of them with Jewish names, I admit that. Basil Zaharov, others I mentioned, but not always Jewish. But and also remember, I've always said you have to bracket this whole thing about Jews anyway. That's a whole separate subject we have to go into, whether or not this represents most Jews, and I'm maintaining that it does not. This is a fallacy, just because they've got Jewish names. But the thing to also understand is that these fanatical zealots when they were destroyed by Rome, can you imagine the fury? And can you imagine the converts that they got? So when history moved on, when history of the Middle East moved on, because, Vespasian and Titus have dealt with it. They've crushed Judea. Nothing to see here, move on. No. The Zealots were still alive. Some of their leaders, right? They were just moved location, that's all. And then, as we know from Ralph's work, they're in league with the Parthian elite, who've also been devastated. Their leader's been sent to, like a man in the Iron Mask. He's been sent into incarceration in Britain, and remnants of his family have followed him out to the west. So your eyes are taken off the ball. But for goodness sake, let's realize that these zealots and Sicarii not only were pushed underground, but they received many converts because Rome had done the unthinkable. And the zealots had said, see, we told you what they were like. And so the zealots were then able to capitalize on this disgruntlement because the whole of Judea had been ransacked and ruined. People were out of their homes, burned out. And you've seen that what this happens in Ireland and other places. You join the guerrillas. Young, stupid men, right? The useful idiots go, there you go, you guys were right. I should have listened to you back then. Where's my camouflage jacket and hat? I'm joining you. So a new order of basically criminals and drug peddlers and child traffickers, or whatever you want to call it, is pretty dirty, right? Formed. So you have the elite Sadducees on one side who've resettled, but their fingers are now in many evil things. Many of it also in the Muslim world. Muslims have been known for their harems, for their incredible kidnapping of children, even for their armies. You can look it all up. And for their drug trade. Well, the Gaonim were in on it. This is what we call the underground, the black hand, the black market started here, for those who want to know. And it has never stopped. And it gained more money than anyone's ever thought of. Yes, some Romans were involved in it, but really this is more the case of the Eastern Illuminati. And then when the Templars joined them 1,000 years later, you know why the Templars went out and joined them? Because the Templars had their antenna up, their ears, and said, these boys are billionaires in the East. Let's go and combine with them. So they went straight to Edessa as the headquarters, because Edessa became this, what would you call it, neutral ground, like for one of these G summits. We'll go there. Everyone knows where to find us. We'll put the word out, and the leaders of the Gaonim and these other secret societies will come, and we'll all have a big conflab, and we'll join together. So this is it. And the James Bond series, when it was worth watching, that is, whistle blows it, as many other movies do. Right? I've spoken about this many times before. It was the fabulous wealth. But when the Templars got there, they found out to their amazement that these Gaonim are already real involved. They're modern. They're already in league with the Italian Fondi, that's the Mercs, and the Silesian Pirates, and the Amalfi, and other groups I could mention, right? But these, I'm mentioning the big ones here. So the Templars are like the newcomers, but they had pedigree, and they were accepted. Because the one thing that the Eastern Illuminati didn't quite have is this connection to the West. And the Templar said, we'll offer it to you. In exchange for what you give us in the combine, in the agreement, we will open the West to you. And they went, done deal. And so income, as I mentioned in Article 2, the entrance of these Parthians, they came under the name of Benjaminites. They're very clever. When they came in, they used the term Franks, the Sicambrian Franks, and also Benjaminites. But this is, so when you understand the coding, you understand who they are. They became the Merovingians. And the Merovingians were always had this, again, as I say, Jewish element. That's the Gaonim. That's the Atonist element. Shouldn't be confused with normal Judaism, which it is confused. That's why we're doing this work right now, and I've done it all my life. They are confused. So Epstein is considered a Jew to the anti-Semites because those anti-Semites are funded by the same Atonist group I'm talking about. Let me repeat that. Anti-Semitism as it is, pervade, is part of this conspiracy, and the Templar clerics are behind it. They tried it early on. There's many complicated reasons as to why they do this, but the simplest one is because, remember, their intent is to spread political socialism. So in my articles, I do mention the fact that we had early instances of this attempt, and then they backfired, thank goodness. And the two that I mention are the followers of Sabbatai Zevi, we call the Sabbatians, and later the Frankists. These are groups when the clerics, and these, clerics include now, when the Templars joined with the Gaonim, they're all in one and the same group, right? So clerics now become part of the Gaonim, right? They're all in one group. You could call them Masons if you want, loosely, that's correct. So this Masonic element tried to infiltrate Judaism and Islam in the two, using the two messianic characters I just spoke about. Sabbatai Zevi tried to infiltrate Judaism, and Jacob Frank tried it with Islam. You see how this works? Two failed attempts. And the agenda for this, the creation of these groups, was to infiltrate Judaism and Islam to spread socialism. And it was caught. Right? The Jewish authorities caught Sabbatai Zevi and arrested him and had him killed. And the Muslim Sultan also had Jacob Frank killed, because they knew at that time they were on the ball. We're not on the ball. So it took till much later times for socialism to spread into Islam, which it did, and into Judaism, which it did. But these two earlier attempts, no other scholar will tell you this, what I'm talking about. Maybe only Charles Moskowitz. And maybe one day you'll interview him too. He's fantastic. So on some subjects regarding occult Judaism, he's excellent. So and by the way, I recommend that people go to Unslaved, sign up there, and listen to all of our podcasts with him, especially the one called Left Wing Anti-Semitism. Must promote that. So, but these were earlier, just to get back into context. Socialism has been attempted to infiltrate Judaism and Islam and Christianity for hundreds of years. But it was premature and it didn't work. That's all. So we have those two phenomena. But the idea was that this underground criminal aspect is where they bankroll. This is where their money comes from. We already said why the Templars wanted to join with Eastern Illuminatis, because they saw over the hill, they saw over the wall and went, these guys are richer than us. Here we are shivering in our castles in the West. These boyos are like ready to conquer the world. We got to get in on that. It's like a mafioso thing, two families of the mafia coming together, right? So they said, yeah, let's hope that we can. But they had the one thing that the Gaonim didn't have, and that is the West. This is an empire. You're talking about Roman Empire? Look, this secret society empire of the Gaonim, the big G, the big serpent brotherhood, wanted to spread. And here's a group coming and saying, right, trust us. We'll handshake with you and you're in. And that's exactly what happened. The Merovingians come in with the Benjaminites. I explain all of this in Article 2. And this is then, where the Merovingian power matters.
And the Merovingians, for people who are not familiar with, this is the French royal dynasty, is that right?
Yeah.
Of the first
Yeah.
millennia. Yes.
That's what it appears in the history books, yeah. But it's so much more than that. It's also connected very deeply with the Irish Chaldean, what we call the Irish Chaldees. So Ireland comes in again. As I said, Ireland matters so much in all of this, on these debates. And it matters a lot to the Merovingians, because when the Merovingians were young princes, they went for schooling in Ireland, and also Irish monks from Ireland, you would come over to France to be the tutors of the Merovingians. Now that makes my skin crawl, because I know who these Irish Chaldeans were. They are also Atonists. They're just Atonists in your backyard. You don't have to go all the way to the east, right? The Atonists have come with Akhenaton's daughter, Meritaten, to Ireland and Britain long ago. So listen, they're the elite of the Atonists. Right? They're not just derivative Atonists. These are the main, where the major princess and her people are. So we're in league with them. But that's been airbrushed, you see, when all of the different history books never want to talk about that. But the Chaldees, or the Chaldeans, what we know as the Celtic Church, are Atonists. That's why their cross has a huge sun on it and a cross. They're Egyptian. It comes out of Egypt. all this nonsense about St. Patrick and all the, the whole history has just been Disney. It was made into a Disney cartoon, and everybody's fallen for it. But the Merovingians were educated by these people.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a whole
Yeah.
Irish connection here.
It's fascinating, and people should check out. I think we've done episodes with Ralph before. This daughter of Akhenaton and Nefertiti was also known as Scotia, and this was the origin of the Scottish people of Scotland, named after Scotia. You can read about it in the Scotty Chronicon, as well as the Irish mythology books as well too. But we spoke. I'll speak a little bit next about how this group, the Gaonim, moved from the east back into the west. But just before we go on to that, we touched a little bit about Jeffrey Epstein and his temple. And just out of curiosity, I looked up a little bit about the symbolism and what was in the temple. So I'll maybe share that for a second, because if people are not familiar with it, the tie-in with this is unbelievable. Give me one wee moment. So again, this is the temple here that was found in Jeffrey Epstein's island, where all the world's billionaires and the major politicians and the big bankers all went and had these, sex traffic parties with minors and whatnot, and drug escapades. Yes, so what was inside this temple, which was on Jeffrey Epstein's island, included things like a grand piano, portraits, including one of Epstein with the Pope, unbelievably, dinghy mattresses, which is interesting. I wonder what they were used for. And there was an elaborate ceiling mural depicting zodiac signs, just as we have been speaking about astrotheology being the origin of religion. There's also things like animals. There was also mythical creatures, constellations, and seafaring imagery against the cloudy sky background. So this all relates to this exodus and sort of a crossing the sea and things we spoke about. And just to give a little bit more detail about this, because it gets more interesting. So, a more speculative symbolic layer connects the structure to ancient Jerusalem and the broader Middle East through occult and religious lenses. Some analyses point to its resemblance to the Dome of Rock in Jerusalem, which is an iconic Islamic shrine with a golden dome, blue-tiled walls and octagonal base, built atop the site of the biblical Temple of Solomon, which was the one that was destroyed in 70 AD. And this parallel isn't just visual. Epstein's documented interest in occult literature includes books on sex magic, the Kabbalah. There's a lot more information regarding what was in this temple and the sort of the symbolism behind it here for people to read further on. But yeah, I'll maybe get back to the little presentation. Or do you want to make a comment on that, Michael, about this kind of symbolism, this sort of zodiac inside it?
Yeah. America, you talked about transition there and stars. America is named after a star in the constellation known as Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. In other words, one of the stars in the tail or the handle of the Dipper is called Medica or Merak, right? And it was the star that the Knights Templar used when they crossed the Atlantic. So when they succeeded in finding land, when they had landfall, they called the land Medica after the star that had led them there. Yeah.
That's fascinating, that. Yeah, I had no idea.
So, of course, anybody with a Masonic connection is going to use the star for that purpose. The star is actually, you can look it up, America, in the Big Dipper.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's where you get the stars and stripes and all the rest of it. And the stars and stripes are the Templar colors, red and white. And the star is the star that they use to navigate the high seas. It's all there. Same thing on the dollar bill. Will all be decoded using Templar symbolism, as I've shown in my articles and what have you.
Yeah, this symbolism is so important to all of this, isn't it? I think even this temple was placed on the southeast corner of the island as well too. So it's all about these alignments and geometry and whatnot.
Yes.
But
yes, it would be like for instance, the Templars have their main logo was the symbol of two riders on a horse. Well, that's the Templar and his cleric. It's not two Templars. It is in a way, but it's a Templar and his squire. Because remember, the Templars don't run it anymore. Ha ha ha. But the cleric does. So their symbol showed that they're a duad. They're telling you. The Templar's in hiding. He gives the orders from upstairs. But there's a cleric. There's a squire. There's an exon who rides with him or as him. The double cross is the same thing. The double cross is the Templar himself, the Lord, and then these exons that have equal status, not quite equal, but you know what I mean. They run shop. They're out front. And they can be pulled from any group. But the thing is that they're fiercely loyal. They've been loyal for thousands of years. Well, of course they are, because they'll be fucking wiped out. This is a criminal institution. The Epsteins of the world do not stab their masters in the back. This is the world order, the real one. And it's serious. This is Spectre. You can't go against them. First of all, you wouldn't want to. It's in your blood, because you're evil. And you also know you can't dissent. You don't want to dissent. This is your people. These are your people. This is the underground. You've profited to the tune of billions. You know? So he is just a representative. Before him, you had others. I mentioned their names. All of this is documented. All these characters in different countries. We still have them. Epstein is not just the only one. Our government and our world is saturated with these agents of the Gaonim and the clerics. The institutions from which they came have been created by these clerics. The whole thing, they are the network. You asked who runs the world last time. Well, I'm telling you, it's these guys. They opened every institute you know, from the educational schools to other philanthropies, to the Democratic Party and all of these different orgs that they control. There's almost nothing that they don't control.
Yeah, the whole banking system,
Same
that's
thing.
what we're talking about,
Same thing.
It's
Absolutely.
crazy, isn't it? Yeah, it was actually one last little bit of information that came across on that island. It's in the shape of this temple. It's called a turba, which is a domed tomb or mausoleum found in Islamic cemeteries, such as the one called Turbat al-Kub'akaya in Jerusalem from the 1920s. So it's so strange, the symbolism that they choose to use. Things that like, I'll mimic a mausoleum. What normal person thinks like this with it,
Yeah. Well, remember,
yeah.
I told you before that the symbol of the coffin represented the death and the smuggling out and then the resurrection. So tombs and coffins do represent a symbol for them, because it's the resurrected Sadducees, right? It's the resurrected Judeans from a destroyed civilization. That's how they look at it. So they're very into symbols that represent resurrection, like the skull and bones, like coffins, like mausoleums. It all fits. It's why you get so much of it. Skeleton, coming alive or whatever. They have a penchant for that type of symbolism, because that's the way they see it, that they were crushed, they were destroyed, and then they rose again.
Yeah. I have a little photo of this sort of coffin as part of the presentation, so it's maybe apropos just to call that up, and we'll carry on from there. So again, this is from the Princes of Light article on Michael's website. Then, as fate decreed, upon their move westward, they came into contact with the leaders of the Knights Templar, who were embarked upon their great crusade. It was a faithful but monstrous alliance. When Hugh de Paynes returned to France, we are told that he was accompanied by 9 strange companions who appeared to be monks or pilgrims. Apparently these members of the Gaonim were being escorted right into the centres of power by senior Gentile nobles. Of course the Templars had long been served by the Jews, but this unidentified group of 9 were obviously of a different stock. Did they help finance the exploits of the Templars in exchange for assistance and entry into the West? It was at this time, or shortly after, that they changed their name from Gaonim to Freemason. Hopefully you know why there is apparently so much Jewish symbolism to be found in the iconography of Masonry. And so this is this symbol you were speaking about of the coffin of this man inside with it. You've got the skull and the bones. You have these other Masonic symbolism that goes along with it too, of the checkered floor and whatnot. And so, yeah, again, just to make sure people are following along, we had the Sadducees. They got absolutely crushed and destroyed in ancient Judea in AD 70. This was the Romans came in, crushed the area, ransacked the temple, stole all the goods. These guys who were, and again, this was the richest and most powerful part of the richest part of the Roman Empire. This include places like Palmyra, which was beside Jerusalem also, was run by the same Edessan monarchy. They then left. They then went eastward, as you were saying, where they became the Gaonim. This is where they worked with the Islamic civilizations of the time, and they were there for centuries. They found a great amount of wealth. And they then moved back with the Knights Templar as they came at around the turn of, this is about the 1100s or roughly around that sort of era. And then they spread out then to become a lot of the royal families. Is that right then of Europe? Is that sort of the Merovingians and whatnot? That's sort of what was going on.
And that's whistle blown when you hear the story about the Knights Templar going to Scotland to help the nobleman, right, the king, Robert the Bruce. Well, you think he's the only one? Sure, they went to Switzerland. They were everywhere. They were the bankers. There wasn't a king that hadn't borrowed money from them. What do you get in return for that loan? So Templars were allowed to have homes, castles, preceptories in every country you can think of. And they were able to grab the richest land because these greedy, poverty-stricken kings all over the place were borrowing money from them. Usury. It started not with Jews, it started with these guys. And they were able to lend money. I've gone into detail in this in other programs. And therefore, in return, they were given giant swathes of land. Did you know that basically the whole of London is owned by the Templars? Yeah, still is. Or they're clerics, let's put it that way, right? So tourists go around these places, and they see all these weird dome-shaped shrines, preceptories, temples, pubs, bars, and they've no idea what they're looking at, the symbolism. The very gates of London are guarded by two dragons. And those are representing these guilds and these livery companies that are all run by the Templar clerics, every single one of them. Yeah, they owned a lot. So we've talked about their criminal hand. That's where when the Sadducees moved out, they were already wealthy. They were already the wealthiest Jews in Judea. So they had a head start when they went out to the Islamic countries. That no Islamic person had as much money as they did. So they were already going to be an oligarchy when they moved out into, Babylon areas. They were welcomed. And what did they do? Start doing their usury there. Right? This is how they get in. They start lending money there to countries that ban it. But secretly, people want to loan the money to build their businesses. So the Gaonim started up in money trading and other things over there, and then had this what we're now trying to describe, you see, is this underground black market. Yeah, because they started to realize the benefit of this. They weren't going to make mistakes like they had before because they had always this conflagration in their mind, very fresh. The destruction of Judea was on their mind. And this is partly one of the reasons why they went underground. But the other reason, if you're looking for it, is because the other groups to which they were aligned were already criminal organizations like these Silesian pirates I'm talking about and the Italian mercs. These are some of the most dastardly, groups that you can imagine. What we know as pirates, real pirates, came from these people. These are marauders. They're unspeakable criminals. So the Gaonim just went along with it. Said, well, we're all in bed together. Yeah, we'll do a bit of this black market thing as well. And they were running gunpowder, running guns, running, the diamond trade. I don't need to name it all because there's nothing that they weren't into. It's all a combine. Movies have whistle-blown it. But I'm just, showing you where it's at. So you cannot lay this at the feet of the Jewish people, right? This is just ridiculous. Because as I said, these Sadducees who had the power and the money, they don't even go back through the line of David. They weren't even considered Jews by Jews at the time. That's the end of the story of the Jewish conspiracy. But people who don't know that, right? People, anti-Semites, and I've already said that they're funded by some very powerful people who want to keep this going. They want to sacrifice Jews, just like they want to do with Christians. There's something going on, you see, that implicates ordinary Jewish people. Imagine, look, say you're a teenager out there, 17, 18, 19, and you're half Jewish. And you come across this stuff on the internet implicating you and your people that you're part of some international conspiracy. All your life, all you've known is the greats within Judaism who've helped the West. Hundreds and hundreds of names, right, of the benefactors, the great filmmakers, the great musicians, and what have you, right? The great comedians, and all the other inventors and scientists. You've grown up with that. And then suddenly you come across this story that, no, your people are satanic, part of a satanic, Luciferian, synagogue of Satan conspiracy. How are you going to feel? What are you going to do? Can you imagine the horror of that? And you won't know where to turn. Maybe you're lucky if you go to your rabbi and he'll explain it. That these Christians are mad and they've been mad for centuries and they hate us. Don't you know your stories? Your Bible goes, yeah, I remember all of that. Yeah, it goes, well, this is part of it. We as a people are absolutely hated. And he goes, yeah, but what about all this conspiracy stuff? They think we're running some conspiracy. So hopefully you'll have somebody who can explain it. But what happens if you don't? What happens if you're a Jewish kid and you have nowhere to turn? Isn't that breeding hatred? Aren't you going to want to then go towards organizations that you do find within Judaism that despise Christianity and God? Aren't you going to want to maybe go towards political leftist movements when you join college? Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. The Jew doesn't see it. He gets fanatical. The Christian doesn't see it, and they get fanatical. And this is how you maintain disorder. Yeah. Divide and rule, just like the Masonic compass shows you.
That'll bring us on to the next bit about who the main competition of the Fourth Sect were, which is who the Fifth Sect are. So again, this Fourth Sect, as we're saying, this is this Gaonim. This is the sect that lost. This was the sect that Jesus was a part of, King Jesus. This is this Edessan monarchy, the Sadducees. And so this is again another little part from your article, Michael. After the suppression of the Templars, the Gaonim worked in concert with the army of deputies or clerics who continued to run the Templar Empire. We know these clerics as the Knights Hospitallers, or as they are now known, the Knights of Malta. Although now ensconced in Rome, this cabal, which technically predates the Templar Order, is related to the Fourth Sect, not the Fifth. And again, the Fifth Sect, for those who prefer the Walt Disney version of history, the Fourth Sect constitute the Protestant branch of Christianity, while the Fifth Sect constitute the Catholic or Vatican-based or Papal branch. Do you want to speak a little bit about this Fifth Sect, or maybe the conflict that the Fourth and Fifth Sect have had over the centuries and how that's shaped history a bit?
Well, when we talk about the pushing underground, this also happens to tie into what we're talking about because, you see, not only was Judea smashed, but the Romans bankrolled St. Paul, also known as Josephus, to rescript elements of Judaism to create what we know as the Fifth Sect. One sect, the Fourth, was pushed underground, and they became largely criminal. That's where you can trace the conspiracy. They were bankrolled by the Parthian Atonist elite. But the Roman Empire, their opponents of the Parthians, bankrolled the Fifth Sect, Josephus's group. You see how it works? These are two factions. The Romans backed what became Catholicism, in the terms of Constantine. And Constantine just butchered everyone, butchered Christians and everyone who stood against him. This was done through wholesale ransacking and mass murder. Yeah. For a while later on, you had Julian the Apostate who tried to turn things around and go back to the worship of Mithra, but that didn't work. The next king then brought this kind of, Constantine pattern back, and Christianity held its dominion until the modern day. So we're lumbered with it. And it's about as bankrupt as you can get. The Jesus that it presents to us in the gospel is just farcical. They've no idea even who their own, master was. But it had been beautifully amalgamated with pagan lore, of the sun god, the sun king, that had been known to many of the people throughout the world, especially in the West. And this made it attractive, naturally, right? And other elements were thrown in. And so it lasted. As part of it lasting, you had to destroy a lot of groups, like the Celtic Church we talked about. So they're both Atonist groups, but now they become rivals. And so the Roman group fights the Celtic Church and overcomes it. That's the story of St. Patrick. Tries to fight the Orthodox group in Constantinople, Byzantine, right? They don't actually succeed in overcoming them, but they establish their new headquarters in Rome. So you have already two different, groups of Christianity: Eastern Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and the Roman version, all at loggerheads, all believing different things. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
But these are two factions now. And I believe that the attempts to infiltrate the Fifth Sect had been happening since the rise of the Jesuits in the 16th century, but it didn't succeed because it was done in a way in which it was going to take time. Even the creation of the Illuminati was an extreme version to try and bring down all religion, but that was too premature. It didn't work. The movement that we're talking about, these clerics, often are very impatient. They're so fabulously wealthy that they thought they could manage it at different points. And they've been itching to see the overthrow of the Fifth Sect. Now, I believe, and I may be wrong here, that the real overtaking didn't happen until, around about 1890. That's what my personal feeling is. And that is why only 20, 30 years later, you get the rise of Bolshevism. But had Roman Catholicism, in the original conservative mode, not been overtaken, say it had remained, you couldn't have had communism. You first had to have the destruction of the papal Fifth Sect by the world socialists or the world revolutionaries. For 20 years later, what happened in Russia to even occur? You get it? There's no way that under the auspices of the original Catholic Church, communism would have been allowed to fester. Just no way. There's no getting around that. It might have existed as just one other crazy iconoclastic movement, but the Catholic Church has had a history of being able to suppress all sorts of revolts like that, like the Peasants' Revolt, like Jan Hus, people can look that up, Wat Tyler, the Anabaptists, and the list goes on and on and on throughout Europe. And as I mentioned in the previous podcast, the Teutonic Knights was an army expressly commissioned to go after anything that even resembled, a revolution. The Protestants and the Catholics had a 30 years war for this very purpose. And other wars that were extended in time proved my point. The Catholics were not about to allow dissent. But within 20 years of the opening of the 20th century, communism is allowed to fester in all the lands of Europe and abroad. I tell you, that is impossible unless the actual Catholic Church itself had been subverted from within. And that's the thesis, that I hold to and try to present to people. And the whistle was blown by brilliant writers in the past who warned about the Jesuits not being what they quite, appear to be on the surface. And their Illuminati symbolism, the Atonist symbolism, the symbolism going back to the Knights Templar. Once you know how to tease it out, it's all there. I write about it in my articles. There can be no doubt what we're talking about. But this is all the industry of the clerics. And I repeat again, we know they were busy with this socialization number because we wouldn't have had the Frankists and the Sabbateans if they had, those two events. And there was plenty more, by the way. There was at least a dozen messianic lunatics. I'm not saying that all of them were part of the conspiracy. Judaism has had its lunatic claimants for messiahship since the beginning. But I just want to mention that there was about a dozen of them, all mad, and most of them taken out. Most of them, Judaism dealt with them violently, killed them off. The two that stand out that have become more well-known are Sabbatai, Zevi, and, Jacob Frank. But Jacob Frank's own daughter went on. There's a third one. She was called Rebecca, but she changed her name to Eve. Yeah. So it continued for a while until that was stamped out. But the thing is that what are those attempts? What do they really do when you pare it down? They were the attempts of the clerics to find some lunatic madman that might have credentials enough to convert, right? The clerics were infiltrating Judaism and Islam through these two lunatics. But what purpose? This is what all the authors cannot tell you. What is the purpose of trying to infiltrate such powerful religions? It's to socialize them. It's to bring in socialism in the 15th and 16th century. You see, people say there's no corroboration. Yes, there is. You just got to know how to join the dots. You've got to see what's in front of your eyes. It's all hidden in plain sight. Socialism and communism is not something that arose in the 20th century. It was there with the Essenes, right? Going back even 3 centuries BC. But it raised its ugly head during the time of the Jewish revolt. The Romans had no intention of destroying Judea. No intention whatsoever. History books make it look like the Romans were out of control and just mad and couldn't wait to destroy. Absolutely false. They were forced, their hand was forced by the anarchist movements, who were already basically, so far as we're concerned, criminal, but also drug-addled madmen, screaming at the moon. Yeah? And this is this is then the nucleus of the black market. When they went underground, they knew they were no longer official, and they had to make money, to gain their power. They started, into very, very nefarious activity, but it made them so much money, the drug trade alone. They couldn't believe their luck, and this is how they then became exclusively, into the dark side. Yep. And they've never changed. And so they're behind most of the criminal organizations today. Jeffrey Epstein is just one guy who couldn't keep it under wraps. It poked up to the surface, with him. But it has before. But these are gun runners. These are the people who are, even behind organizations like the IRA, you name it. They've been everywhere. They've had their hand in everywhere. They supply both sides of a conflict. Yeah. But their mindset is socialistic and always has been. So this is one of the ways that you can, do a litmus test and find out where they are. They are the spreaders of world revolution. They were behind the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think a little bit about people getting started in conspiracy sort of work. They hear about the CIA and these organizations and how they have these black book operations of where they control the drug trade in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, or in the South American countries like Colombia and places. And it's them that smuggle a lot of the drugs back into America. Again, they do these kind of things like the trafficking and whatnot in order to raise money and funds. Because can you imagine controlling the world's drug trade? As if like all the world's largest countries like America they can fly in the middle of the night and take, a dictator away out of Venezuela, but they can't, patrol all the world's oceans with all these large drug trafficking trades going by and all the large ships.
That's right. It's a
obviously
farce.
They're, you know what I mean? Like, of course they could stop it tomorrow if they wanted, all this talk about closing borders and
But these drug
things.
dealers that I'm talking about, they are immensely powerful, and they're not just like you see in a movie or something like that.
These are top of the top of the top.
Oh, they're so incredibly powerful. They are the ones who are behind the munitions factories. Yeah, their money bankrolls banks.
Yeah.
This is the real black hand we're talking about. Yeah, it's all a criminal enterprise, and it's rotten as hell. And now and again, a more public figure jumps up. But see, these guys are the money entirely behind Hollywood. That's one edifice that's they have created from the ground up. Yeah. People know there's a big Jewish presence, the Jewish moguls. No, they're not Jewish. They don't represent Judaism at all. They have Jewish names. These Daryl Zanuks and all the rest of them, right? Selznick and what have you, right? And Louis B. Mayer. But these are not Jews. No, these are not Jews. This is all wrong. Just in the same way today that your Harvey Weinsteins and all, they're not Jews in any sense of the word. These are part of the smuggling, just like Jeffrey Epstein. Right? They're into girls. They're into drugs. They're into crime. But they have to launder some of their stuff. And so a lot of it, it just came about that they monopolized the movie business. But that's only one element. They run the music business. They run big pharma. Right. Before that, in the earlier days, they ran all of these different equestrian orders and livery companies and guilds. But mostly important, as you said several times, banking, money lending. Yeah, this was the most lucrative. The Templars were in on it. Finally, they got so fat that they didn't want to bother anymore. So they just took their Jewish servants, their scions, and said, okay, we're going to have you run, the banks from Amsterdam and other places. We're tired of it. We've made too much money. This is beneath us now. So you guys remain loyal. So they picked a few families and said, under pain of death, if you say yes, you're going to help us, right? Then you must help us, but you can't ever not help us. You can't sign off. Well, these loyal so-called Jewish families, they've remained loyal. The Rothschilds and groups like that. But they're only tassel to purse. They don't give the orders. They benefit from taking orders themselves, and they're given rewards for their loyalty. But again, some other hand is interested in always having the groups fight each other, because chaos is, at the end of the day, their mentality. These are poisonous, evil people. So they don't love Jews, they don't love Christians, they don't love anyone. They've infiltrated some of these movements, and they don't mind that these movements all clash. They thrive out of that chaos. And the human race hasn't worked this out yet. See, while you're going after the average Jew at the end of the street or whatever, you're not seeing how you've been had. And you don't know anything about the roots of your own belief systems. The Christian knows nothing about his own origins of Christianity. The Jew knows very little about Judaism. Because how can you rely on your teachers? The teachers are often initiates of these secret societies. They don't represent Judaism or Christianity. They've been teaching you false. See, what we're talking about here is the truth of it all. But your normal rabbi and your normal Christian pastor don't know anything about this. And the ones who did, there have been some who have, they've been shut down. They've been banned and called extremists. The government makes sure they're not funded. Charles Chinnequay, Father Alberto, right? There's been plenty of whistleblowers. Baron Avro Manhattan, we need to do something on him, down the line. These are the great names. I'm the only one talking about them. I've scanned the entire conspiracy world, and none of the people I mention are even known about anymore. How could you proceed with these missing pieces?
Yeah, I've never heard anyone else mention any of these names. This is what's so fascinating about your work and what I appreciate so much about it. And again, what you've been bringing up, this brings us on just to our last slide here, which I'll share with everyone. So again, we were speaking a bit about this Fourth Sect and the Fifth Sect and the history between them. Well, it turns out who won over time, and it was this Fourth Sect victory which brought on this communism as you've been speaking about. And this is just the final little bit from your article, Michael, Princes of Light. Through their powerful Grand Orient lodges, the Gaonim and Fourth Sect, after their defeat of the Fifth Sect, succeeded in establishing communism in Russia. Once that demonic experiment was brought to a halt, an even more sinister form of cultural socialism was conceived, one which dominates the world today. It has been in the works for centuries. And so what's happened over time is that it's morphed the type of socialism they had. Again, we had the socialism of the last century of the Soviet Union, it's ruled by force, and it's transformed into something slightly different, which is this sort of soft Marxism, this cultural Marxism, which people hear about, this kind of Marcusian type of socialism as you've described. Can you speak a little bit more about how it manifests today, this socialist goal of the Gaonim?
Well, that's right. The Bolshevik form was never meant to be lasting. It was an impatient, impulsive move to put Russia under ice, and also China and other lands, and it succeeded. And it can hold you under a vice, which it has done, but unfortunately, eventually the culture starts to rot. And so many other more sophisticated thinkers, Sidney Webb and others I can mention, these Harold Laskys, there's been a whole bevy of these people, and even people above them decided, look, we need something more sophisticated than this. It only works for a while. And so this is why they wheeled out the cultural Marxism. And of course, the 1989-ish, the wall coming down, it took them a while. to mobilize this. They actually have, in one way, moved quite slowly, even though, as I said, there's an impulsive streak. But over time, they've managed to sort of dial back on this hardline Bolshevik type of setup, because it wasn't too popular, and you had people like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell and many others, sort of expose it for the fraud that it is and the horror. Alexander Solzhenitsyn would be another great critic of it, but there's been many critics. So they knew that they needed something more sophisticated, more psychologically based. And this is what they've done. They've targeted the kids, targeted the young, thoroughly immoral, jaded, hedonistic, episodic. And through their colleges and universities, they've been able to indoctrinate them. We call it the woke world. But people should always realize how ancient this kind of thinking is. It's the hallmark of these groups. And they realized that, look, you can't just infiltrate Western countries, you've got to get in with Islam as well. And so during the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which again, a lot of people in the West have no concern about, they don't know anything about it, the leaders of the dying Ottoman Empire were all communist. You see, so it entered in there, and this is where you get the origin of Islamo-communism coming in, another monster. So people who look at these Ayatollahs, people who look at these fanatics in the Muslim world, fail to understand that even their thinking is left-wing. Their thinking is socialistic. Can you imagine that they're indoctrinated by that, and they have strong ties to the old Russia? Well, you can see it in any march that they make. Just look at the placards, right? Yeah, and we were one of the first people to mention this. It's becoming a little bit more well known in the mainstream now. Communism, Islamofascism, it's becoming a little bit more visible now to the world. But most of them still can't answer it. It's so difficult to explain. Well, it's not if you fill in all of this history. This is all the history we're talking about makes it. Now, Ireland was one of the targets way back. That's how you get your groups like the IRA, and the Knights of St. Patrick and the Ribbon Lodges. And the whole conflicts in Ireland is a microcosm of exactly what we're talking about. Because just like the Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank and those groups who tried to infiltrate other groups, so in Ireland was targeted. Italy was targeted. Turkey was targeted. Russia was targeted. But Ireland also, the history of Ireland can be understood in exactly this. Once you've got this down, the conflicts in Ireland now take on their true dimensions. Ireland was nothing more than another theater of operation for this Fourth Sect to take over. They've tried it here, they've tried it there. Left-wing guerrillas, left-wing insurgency, filling the minds of the young full of nonsense to get them to murder their own people or get them to murder people that have nothing really that different from them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, again, understand that, and the symbolism will tell you all about it.
Yeah, in the communist symbolism, just to share it once more with people. So, of course, everybody was familiar with the hammer and sickle, but always above it that never really gets mentioned is this 5-pointed star. Has this got to do with this cult of Venus? How does this tie into everything, Michael?
Yeah, of course it does, right? It's an occult symbol. It's from Masonry. It represents their emblem often, as does the red itself. The red flag was the flag that the Fondi, or not the Fondi. Well, yes, the Fondi, right? But the Fondi and the Silesian pirates worked together. And what would happen is that pirate ships were created in an alliance with the Italian insurance companies. But many of the independent merchants all around in the hundreds of countries and islands or in the Mediterranean didn't bother getting insurance. So if your ship and your shipping company deigned to operate without insurance from the Fondi would set out their criminals in the form of the pirates, because they were in league with these Silesian pirates, and your ship would be ransacked. And the flag that the Silesian pirates would approach you with was a red flag. They have the skull and bones, and that was their emblem, personal emblem. But when they approached you as your ships tried to leave the harbor, and you saw that red flag was prepared to be boarded and looted. And when the captain of the pirate ship came on board, you were meant to pull out a scroll, a parchment, some papers to show that your ship was insured with one of these Italian companies. And if you couldn't, they looted your ship. So from that moment on, now what happened was ship owners started to realize we can't have this go on. So we better insure with these criminals, the other criminals, the Italian fondi. So insurance companies, long before banks existed, this was the way that the groups that we've been talking about today made their money. It was actually through insurance. We never mentioned that before, but now it's time to bring that in. And so the symbol of the red flag, or the red square, was the symbol of the fondi in connection with the pirates that said, warning, you're going to be looted. Do you have a contract with us? If you don't, we own your shit. So wherever the red square is to be found, it's a stamp of the richest people on earth, not the bankers. Banking came later. Banking was the Knights Templars' version of the fondi's manner of getting wealth. Now, every insurance company that you know, doesn't matter what it looks like on the surface, is still run from Italy. The Black Venetians, the Black Venetians, the Black nobility, the fondi, as they're really called, or the Italian mercs. They're super wealthy. They help fund. See, when the Knights Templar would get out to these lands in the east, they had no place to live. So what they did was that they would take over a castle that was in ruins, sometimes overgrown with vegetation or just crumbling in the hot desert. And so the Knights Templar were excellent builders. They're known for that. All the cathedrals, right? We know that later on, these Templars were great masons and builders. So they became this way because they had to build up the old rubble temples and preceptories in the east. The only land they could get hold of to live in that was suitable, that had moats, that had protection, so they built it up. But while they're doing this, who's feeding them? Who's bringing the cement and supplies? Who's bringing the donkeys and the horses and the wine? The Italian mercs. The Templars went into a relationship with the Italian mercs that said, you will supply us while we are setting up shop here and building, and restoring these castles. We need you. We can't do it on our own. This is all, not been told to us about their history, but when you do a deeper dive, you'll find out that the Silesian pirates and the Italian mercs and other groups were assisting the Templars. They were all a combine, remember, I've said that. But this is it. It was mostly a very pragmatic thing, bringing horses, bringing supplies, bringing leather, bringing weapons. Who's going to run all of this for you? So they have the occult agenda, but they've got other physical agendas. And so the Templars are having a great time partying with these groups, going, we like you. Tell us about your history. And so the Templars are able to see how you make money through highwayman behavior, smuggling, right? Confiscation, extortion. We call it banking now. Right? Yeah, but these Italian mercs built the world. They're behind the Renaissance. And they're incredibly wealthy. And their main emblem is the black horse. Right? Yeah, the black horse, wherever you see it, and you'll see it a lot when you start looking for it, the black horse is the symbol of the Italian fondi, or Italian mercs. They have more symbols, but that's the main one. And the other one is the red flag. So back to your story about the communists. That's not a communist symbol. None of that stuff is. It's a druidic symbol of the sickle, right? Atonist symbols. The sledgehammer is Masonic. It's a Masonic gavel. And the star is Masonic. And the red is secret society, Italian fondi, confiscators. We're about to board you. So wherever communism is, it's a surreptitious. We're about to board you and take everything you've got. Well, I mean, socialism is always good at spending other people's money, right? Look at this USAID and all the rest of it, flagrant thievery. So it's about prepare to be boarded and looted, taxed to death. Or join us, buy our, product, so to speak, become one of us, and then you have the immunity. But watch out if you don't. And so the Skull and Bones Society in America, which is just an emanation of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, right? Chatham House, the Skull and Bones. But the Skull and Bones is saying, yeah, this is the Ivy League colleges are where you come to be recruited into this occult agenda. We need intelligence. We need people who are, young to replace the ones who are older, the ones who are dying out. We need to replace them. So we slap our images on different universities, you see, to show you, send your children to us, pay a huge fee, but in response to that, we will recruit your child, educate him, and he's going to become the next prime minister, president, CEO, or just even teacher. You're all in the pay. It's phenomenal how they've got it all cornered. And then for the unwashed masses, just shove a gun into their hand or shove some drugs into their mouth. Let them go and kill somebody or murder somebody. Give them some cause. Tell them it's for anarchy and destroy capitalism. They're being oppressed. Tell a Muslim he's being oppressed. Tell a Christian he's being oppressed. Fuck, it works every time.
It's exactly what's going on with the left today politically. Like if you look at what's happening in Minneapolis and all these places and Palestine, all the Palestine marches. I seen one here today in Belfast. You see all the Palestine flags, you see all the sort of Islamic symbolism, and always in the center of it is this communist flag running through it all. And it's unreal. I mean, it's full of it every week. I'll have to put up clips of it.
Yeah. And it's been going round and round and round and round and round and round. I don't know when people are going to wake up. Once upon a time, Jews were able to smash, the infiltrators, the false messiahs. Even Islam was a little bit more wary. Christianity, fucking pathetic. It's been infiltrated. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry can't get it straight. And now the whole world has tumbled. Because they work incrementally. They work with one another. They're very, very clever. They're very, very wealthy. And they've learned psychology, learned how to work with the right brain, as I said, through things like Hollywood and pop videos and all. They're full of, it's just revolting when you know what's going on. But they're people's champions. They bankroll them. They're relentless.
And what we're largely talking about is just the history of criminality. Like the world's just run by gangsters. This is what it boils down to, isn't it? Like people with no morals, they'll kill anyone, do anything. And once they have that weapon of power, like they're just not going to give it up. And naturally they decide, if you can foment a revolution in the country and then you fund both sides of the war, it's all just a big chess game to them, isn't it? Like, isn't that really what it is? Yeah.
Yes, and they've got man against woman, with the rise of feminism. They've covered all the bases.
Divide and conquer. Yeah.
Yeah, and never let you rest for a moment. Give you no peace. All working towards their dystopia. Always, they take idealistic minds, promise you a utopia, and they let you go at it. But they make sure that they work on your hang-ups, work on your frustrations, work on your envy of the successful person. See, you want to tear them down. And they've got a playbook. Communism was a testing ground. Yeah, it worked. It taught them a lot, but it also taught them that to do it in a more sophisticated way. So we're living in times since about, 1989. People get dated before that if you want, but really it's since the coming down of the wall that they started to really openly mobilize. And look how many pop stars were used. I don't know if you remember the times, but back in 89 when the wall came down, there was all this celebrities and pop bands and rock bands doing their thing. Because this reaches the teens. You had Bono, the lunatic. You had Bob Geldof. You had Sting. Just like today, you've got Ethan Hawke and Bruce Springsteen and DiCaprio, and other lunatic people from the media.
I see you're deep into the Modern pop culture, Michael.
Yeah.
these
Yeah, yeah. Well,
youngsters like sprinkling. I'm only
you've
joking.
got these you've got these awful people from Hollywood coming out, still trying to garner interest. They pop up, you see, and this is a little spike. It gets people to go, "Oh, I remember you. I liked your movies."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
I
they're,
liked
they're
your music.
yeah. Oh
People's
no, every
champion.
every 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 major celebrity nowadays is far left. They're all socialists. You can see it in all their media
Mm,
accounts. Like it's how many people
yes.
supported the Democratic Party in the last previous few elections. All of
Yes.
Hollywood was
Yeah.
along with that. Every major celebrity. How many of them all went along with COVID? So these people just go along with the tide of wherever the money and power is and wherever the fame is. And maybe for future episodes, Michael, we'll go into a bit more information about this new form of socialism, of communism that's taking place. This Marxusian type of manipulation of the population. But is there anything you think we haven't really covered today that you'd like to mention as well, also, or maybe you could set us up for maybe where we should go in our next few conversations?
Whoa, well, I think we've done
Mhm.
wonders to get this far. And I hope that by slotting these pieces in, I think that it's important because, you see, the study of Judaism is most important. And these anti-Semites want to lead you away from the truth of the matter, leaving out more than they put in. If newbies are watching, and of course we know they are, my God, we're making your job so much easier so that you don't get hooked, you don't get snagged in the early stages by this bullshit that's put out there and highly funded, with your Nick Fuentes and other lunatic people, right, to get you caught. Because I have been surrounded by people in the past that I was affiliated with who are still there today, 30 years later. And I remember the days in which they were well-meaning and open-minded, and the road was open for them to travel, but they got stuck. And they're still there in the mud today because of, getting hooked. And you just can't talk to them. Their thinking has become moribund, and they don't see anything. Now, of course, that's helped me to then, become more assertive in what I'm talking about and to make it more clear and all of that, on a personal level. But nevertheless, don't get caught in this avenue of thought. Yeah. And do your research. We've got so much on Unslaved. I recommend my series on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Deception. It's called 10 parts. There's 4 more parts on St. Paul. And we've got the Brotherhood of Death. We've got the occult history of the world. We've got several innumerable programs on the Knights Templar. But I would use this female Illuminati site and the articles there, as well as the podcasts. I think it'll help a lot. But what you've put together is fantastic today, is summary of several articles. We might in the future do the Red Papacy, which goes into the direction you're talking about.
Yeah, the Vatican angle. Yeah, more about it. And so you were speaking a little bit about, the content you have on Unslaved. And so everybody, make sure you head over to Unslaved to check out. There's so much more information on these topics. You guys dive a lot deeper. You and David there, who do an amazing job. And maybe just to summarize a little bit of everything we spoke about. So this is just a bit of text from another article you wrote as well, Michael. For all the research out there, we are left with many puzzling questions about the Jewish role in the criminal history of the world. When we read most anti-Jewish researchers, can we verify everything they report? Are their accusations accurate, or are there more plausible explanations for the Jewish penchant for subversion? Actually, the case for anti-Semitism can be destroyed once and for all when we know a little bit about Jewish history. Let's go back to Judea before the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in AD 70. As scholars of the period know all too well, and as the Bible relates, common working-class Jews detested their rich and powerful upper-class leaders, the notorious Pharisees and Sadducees. Breakaway sects such as the Essenes bitterly accuse and condemn the authorities within the Sanhedrin and Jerusalem Temple. However, there is another vitally important reason why common folk sneered at their highly placed patriarchs. The former accused the latter of not being racially Jewish. Many, if not most, of the privileged patriarchs were not descended from the line of David. Rather, their ancestry lies elsewhere in Babylon, Parthia, and most definitely Egypt. After Emperor Vespasian's legions obliterated Judea and scattered his population to the four winds, this fact was all but forgotten. What does this mean for anti-Semites and their diatribes against the Jews? Given that the common folk during that time were scattered and lived lower than third-class citizens in foreign nations, there is absolutely no way they can be accused of fomenting any universal satanic conspiracy. They have neither the wits, vision, nor the finances to do so. They have wrongly been victimized and demonized for centuries. Logically, this means that the world conspirators must be those descended from the rich and powerful Pharisees and Sadducees. Personally, I believe the case for this is plausible and strong. The problem is, as I have already stated, these antagonists were not, in fact, real Jews. At best, they were, like the Ashkenazi, Khazars, Samaritans, Edomites, and Herodians before them, religious converts. Ergo, anti-Semites have been irrationally looking in the wrong place and accusing the wrong people for centuries. And this is something that just seems so prominent. It's just this, let's just call it the global conspiracy, hatred of Jews, and it's just on this massive rise at the moment. But it's just too simple-minded. Have you any other comments there, Michael, just on that?
No, I think that that summarizes it. They were converts. This is well understood. But you see, it was almost too much to say that they were obliterated from history. This just leapt off the page to me. I thought other scholars would also have noticed that it was just implausible. But they didn't. They all gone along with it. Even scholars that you think would know better. So I just persisted. I just kept this idea that I'd learned, in the 80s and 90s, but you couldn't find their footprint, so to speak, until I started, studying deeper into Jewish history, making sure that you're always coming back to the present, like we did with the Jeffrey Epstein, Symbolism and whatever, right? Going back and forth. And then looking at this anecdote of how these Merovingians were in league with what they called the Benjaminites, or these weird hermits that they brought with them and that nobody was ever able to explain. But a few of the early writers, like Flegetanus, and it's even thought that Flegetanus, the historian, might have been Jewish himself, by the way. They're hinting that these hermits that accompanied Hugh de Payens back to France were Jews. Well, that needs to be answered, doesn't it? What's the point of that? You see, so slowly as you read, you get to realize what's been going on since Akhenaton's time, that these Hyksos and Israelites are the same. Way back, you start to seeing the footprint, but you also start seeing the deceptions. How regular history books don't want you to know these things that we're talking about, don't want you to see these connections, and have sort of doctored all of the different accounts so that even Jews have fallen for it. Yeah, let alone Christians, right? And then the early history of Christianity, don't speak of these sects. Josephus makes some allusions to it, sure, but you needed the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We didn't even really know about Gnosticism until the Nag Hammadi scrolls were discovered, you see? So the modern age has been healthy in one way, but then the things that are discovered, and then they found out this book, the Mandean Ginza, that was discovered over in Babylon as well, of the Mandeans who turned out to be the John the Baptist sect. That was a new discovery, And you have other groups that come out, and some of it challenges the gospel narrative. Yeah. And so you have to follow all of that. Just following the Dead Sea Scrolls is, discoveries is a lifetime of research, just that alone, because there's so many different scholars out there, and I've had to do that. Make sense of it. Then the Gnostic texts, what do they are? Esoteric Christianity, what's that all about? Hermeticism, what's that all about? The Catholic Church and its particular orientation, what's that all about? And so when I wrote my books, The Irish Origins of Civilization, I'm trying to do justice to all these threads and even more. We haven't even talked about the real Irish connection to the Druids. We did mention a bit about the Chaldeans and the Merovingians, but that's even more, robust. That's even more voluminous than we talked about. We just touched on it. I speak about that much more in depth in the book. So this book covers, phenomenal ground. the 2 volumes. It's a miracle that it even got written, because there's so much ground to cover. There really is. You're talking about the movement of the races. You're talking about the move of the original 10 tribes of Israel. But you're also talking about cultures in the far west that, in their annals, accept that they were visited by Jews, like the Irish, corroborating the fact that Israelite groups, what we call Israelite groups, did indeed travel west, were dispersed, and that their symbols and iconography and what have you, influenced the Germanics, the Angles and Saxons, the Celts. Right? It's there. And then there's this overarching west to east movement as opposed to the east to west movement. You see, I had to also frame that. That's a giant thesis. I had to cram that in. I had to make that case as well in the same book. So that, when you pull out and zoom out to the furthest. In fact, I've even gone back to Atlantis. The story of Atlantis is even included in this work. That's why it's monumental. That's why people can't get their minds around it. It's quite a lot of information. But see, it didn't stop me, because I knew that in this electronic age of the internet, we'll have time to supplement it with podcasts and debates and talks. I knew it was a monumental work, but I didn't stint from doing it, that even in the book. So then I created websites that there's probably a whole other volume of writings on my website. This could be the 3rd volume of the Irish Origins of Civilization if I wanted to put it in book form. There's more information on the website, or as much as are in the 2 volumes themselves. And that's all free. People need to go there and read it. And then the Female Illuminati site, right, followed that, because there's even more information. Refined, updated, collated. So I find it, it's interesting to me. But I've had to synthesize the writings of many, many scholars. Some of the books I mention as many as I can in the articles, but I put it together in my own unique way. And again, thank you, for the time to be able to go over the main points. I think they're so valuable, and it does tie in very closely to what Ralph has been doing. So I see that you've been interviewing him, and some of the best interviews he's ever done, I think, you're doing together,
Thanks.
you guys. So it's brilliant to see that.
Yeah, thank you very much. We just did 4 hours again on Wednesday, so just in
Oh,
one stint. So there's a lot to come out with it as well too. Yeah.
right. Good.
But yeah, we're still just skimming the surface here, Michael. There's so much more to your work that we've got to delve into there.
Yep.
And so, yeah, everybody, please get the books. Please check out all these websites. And again, you put out so much information for free. You put out the books at very reasonable prices. And again, check out Unslave with it all. So yeah, any last words, Michael, or should we wrap it up there for another week then?
No, mate, I think that's it
Sounds
for
good.
this time around. We can always pick up down the line.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Michael, and thank you to everyone else for stopping by. And just one last time, just please like and subscribe. It really, really helps out new channels like this. I really appreciate it. And if anybody could share it on their own social medias, again, I'd really appreciate that also. But yeah, once more, thank you again, Michael. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Cheers.